Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bad Luck Gamer, and yes, we're going to be doing some Attack on Titan here in Lancer. Today, we're talking about the Atlas, and this is such an interesting frame, but of course, it wouldn't be a Smith Shimano mech if it didn't have toes. And we can at least see boots with toe add-ons on top, so I guess that counts. Also kind of sandally in design. Regardless, the Atlas is genuinely one of the more interesting mechs in the Smith Shimano line. Granted, I do like most of the Smith Shimano mechs, but still, as a pure striker frame and as a mech frame that is specifically designed to utilize its small size and speed to its advantage, it's designed actually pretty well. Being a mech designed to hunt kaiju, I mean, this is very obviously completely designed around the idea of Attack on Titan. Everything Attack on Titan really much shows up here in its entry and its weapons and all kinds of stuff. So, minor plagiarism, it's not plagiarism, but minor plagiarism aside, we have a very fast, high-paced striker mech that's designed to run circles around bigger mechs, tripping them and then trying to finish them off. It is a size 1/2 mech, and honestly, it's a size 1/2 that you don't want to ever add Barrios frame to or whatever that makes it larger, because it actually gets benefits from being smaller. But let's go ahead and take a look at the stats so you can see what I'm talking about. So looking at the base attributes we got here, we have a very, very squishy mech. It has 0 armor and 6 HP, but it does have 12 evasion, which is the highest or ties for the highest evasion in the game, at least as of right now. Though it does have a pretty abysmal E defense in tandem, and it does have an incredibly low heat capacity, which makes sense. This is more or less just a mech, they're just a combat suit. You're barely bigger than a person, if you're even bigger than an actual person. So, and pilots do have 6 HP. With 0 armor, this is just a suit that you're putting on your pilot to use, which is interesting that would count as being a mech frame, but here we are. Now, its sensor range is also the smallest I've ever seen, being 3, and probably going to be the smallest we're ever going to see, other than maybe a 0 potentially in the future. And a -2 to tech attack. This is obviously not a hacker mech. It has a really, really low repair capacity as well, which I find super strange. But I guess that goes into some of its frame traits, which we're going to get to here in a moment. Its save target is average, its speed is really, really high, and its system points is on the lower end of average. Or no, actually it's just below average. So, that being the case, or I guess 7 is technically the average, but a lot of frames have 6. So, anyway, this is a mech that is designed, I don't even think calling it a mech is accurate. This is a frame designed for high speed, but honestly, you're going to want to invest in some hull as well to increase your survivability. As let's be honest here, you are squishy. Any heavy weapon has a chance of just instantly structuring you out, and your super low heat capacity makes you super vulnerable to hacking. This is a mech that honestly, you're probably going to want to look into Black Witch just so you can get some protection from tech attacks, because that low heat capacity is going to hurt. And the only way to boost heat capacity is really to invest in engineering, and honestly, this frame really doesn't want engineering. Maybe a little bit to get some extra limited systems, but even then, I would just go full, I'll go full evasion, full hull, and just pray that the enemy never directly hits you, because otherwise, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. But let's go ahead and take a look at the frame traits. So first we have Giant Killer. The Atlas counts as size 1 for ram and grappling, and it ignores engagement from larger characters and can freely move through and share the spaces that they occupy, even if they're hostile. While you occupy the same space as any character, it gains soft cover even from that character. So, you always have cover if you're sharing someone else's space, even if it's an ally, which is pretty cool, and even if it's an enemy, which is really cool. So this particular frame wants you to always, always, always be right under the enemy, more or less. And that's for good reason. Your high evasion plus the benefit of cover will allow you to actually not get hit a lot of the time, making this mech incredibly good despite its low armor in upfront combat. The only struggles you will have will be tech attacks, but I already mentioned that. Now we also have Jaeger Dodge. Jaeger Dodge is a reaction once per round. Whenever you take damage from a larger character, which if you're size 1/2, almost every character will be larger, you gain resistance to that damage and you can move 3 spaces in any direction as a reaction. This ignores engagement and doesn't provoke reactions. So, Jaeger Dodge is really, really good if you're in a bad situation. That resistance is very necessary because if you do take a big hit, you're going to need it if you're going to survive. And in addition to that, the extra movement on top of it can get you out of some potentially really bad situations. Though, if you're still getting cover in the space, you might not even need to move. There's a lot of ways this can be used very, very well, and it's a very good trait. Then we have Finishing Blow. Once per round, when you deal an additional d6 bonus damage on a successful melee attack against a prone target. So obviously we want to get the target knocked prone, though that's going to be a little hard without some of the systems that we have here in the frame, considering our size. But that being the case, we also have an exposed reactor, so you actually have a +1 difficulty on engineering checks and saves, which is one of the reasons why I said engineering is not really the best on this mech. Now, if we look down here at the weapon mounts, we see that we have a flex mount and a main mount. So, not terrible. I'm happy with the flex mount. I would have gone with 2 flex mounts, to be honest, but I'm always greedy for what good weapon mounts. I do think this makes sense. You're not a very big frame. You can't really pack a lot of weapons. And honestly, you're not going to really want to. You're going to want to use your system points as much as possible to aid you in like knocking enemies prone or protecting your mech from tech attacks or what have you. But as well, you're going to want to be in enemy spaces. So having a bunch of range weapons even really doesn't make a lot of sense. So honestly, main mount being a gun for the range attacks and 2 maybe like daggers until at least rank 3 in the license are going to suit you just fine. And to be honest, there's a ton of Smith Shimano frame licenses that have some really, really good weapons mixed into them. So if you want to go full Smith Shimano, you can do really well with it. Or even dipping into like IPS North Star to get like the Blackbeard weapons, for instance, I think can also be really good. There is a particular weapon on the Drake, the concussive missiles, I think would be really good on this frame as well. So honestly, these 2 mounts, not a big deal, and you can always get another mount through a core bonus if you really, really want to. Last but not least, we have the core system called Final Hunt. And this is a quick action that you can take once per scene, obviously as a core point. When you do so, you move 1 additional space whenever you voluntarily move for any reason. They say 1 additional space rather than increasing your speed by a space because that might have some other ramifications. So, like, for instance, if you ever double your movement, technically, which if you ever double your movement, you still only move 1 space with this no matter what. So, that being the case, it is a good balanced take. I like it. And honestly, you're already super fast, so that 1 extra space is actually going to be rather meaningful because it's going to get you that much further and make your mech that much faster. You also benefit from soft cover at all times, no matter where you are. Insanely good with your high evasion, meaning enemies usually have a difficulty when hitting you, and if they have an accurate weapon, then they are at least not more likely to hit you, and your high evasion, especially if you're fully investing in like agility, is going to make your mech very hard to hit regardless. So a very good feature, and you can even hide even in the open without requiring cover, which is potentially really, really good. This allows you to sneak around to key points on a battlefield, to sneak up on unsuspecting prey on the battlefield, making this mech very good in addition with the Morning Cloak license. And the only way to reveal you is for another character to search for you or for you to lose hidden due to the normal methods, which is boosting, attacking, forcing a save, and so on. When active, once per round, when you make a melee or range attack while hidden, your target must make a hull save or be knocked prone. This takes place before the attack is rolled. So the finishing blow pairs super duper well with the core system, where anytime you make, predominantly we're going to be focusing on melee attacks because that's where we get our bonus damage from anyway. The enemy needs to make a hull save or they get knocked down. So that's really good. And then we do an additional D6 bonus damage with our melee weapon. It makes, honestly, the Atlas one of the best melee frames in the game. Highly defensive. Its only weak point really is tech. It has almost no defenses and can burn out really, really easy. So you do need to be hyper cautious in battlefields where tech is active. But if there's no tech mechs on the enemy side, at the very least, you can most confidently move around the battlefield at will without having to worry about too much, unless, of course, you run into a situation where you're just running into damage, like some kind of hazardous terrain, or enemies are forcing you to make engineering checks, which can be really bad as well. So honestly, the Atlas is really cool. This is a very good mech design. It's very fast, very easy, and it blends in really well with any other mechs that really want to make use of high agility, like the White Witch. So you can have a very offensive and defensive setup with your pilots by using both the Atlas and the White Witch, both found in Smith Shimano, so you can take their core bonuses as you see fit. Honestly, a really good mech design. I really have no complaints about this whatsoever. I've seen some very weird mechs up until this point, and I gotta say this one is one of the easiest I can see to be used. Now, obviously, you do have to stat very specifically in order to make use of this frame. If you're hyper invested in like your systems, you're not going to get a lot of use out of this. And similarly with engineering, you're really not going to get a lot out of this particular frame. This frame really just wants only agility and hull. But of course, it might not be your main frame, in which case it might have some uses in some situations. I really like the Atlas, and it's got a really good license as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. All right, starting off, we have a weapon. You know how much I love weapons, though this one's honestly kind of meh for me either way. So this is the Crow rifle. It's a range 8 CQB, which is very strange. Why is this a rifle? No, rifles are a weapon, so I don't know why this isn't a rifle. I don't know why this is considered a CQB, but it does a D6 damage, which is pretty okay. But the main reason why you're using this weapon is when it hits, the weapon is impaled in like a harpoon-like projectile. Anytime after your target takes any action or movement during their turn, you can reel in the line and boost as a reaction, which if you're investing in agility at all and you're using the Atlas, you're going to be right on them in a second, which is honestly really, really cool. And you move towards the target by the most direct route. They must then pass a hull check or be knocked prone. Succeed or fail, the effect ends. The line snaps if your target teleports. This is also an inaccurate weapon, which it makes sense, kind of. So this allows you to move essentially when it's not your turn, which is very powerful. So the difficulty is the balancing factor. And this isn't going to be your main damage weapon, obviously, in the license. As a D6, while good, we don't have anything that boosts it. And it's not even a rifle, which is very strange. I guess that just makes it more in line with talent trees that you're more likely to go with if you're going with the Atlas in any regard. And actually, you can actually get accuracy on CQB weapons, so the inaccurate isn't even really that big of a deal. So yeah, the main purpose for this weapon is to reel yourself up onto an opponent. Really not much more to do. It's like the 3D gear, okay, from Attack on Titan. I like this frame. I think it works really well, and I'm always a big advocate for if you like something, steal it when it comes to game design. But man, this is just Attack on Titan, and I think the very next system is going to even prove this more accurate. Next up is totally not 3D gear multi-gear maneuver system. Yeah. Though not quite as cool as 3D gear from Attack on Titan, I should say. It doesn't quite give you the same zippiness. It is quite interesting. So, as a quick action, you can fire a zip line. Now, the zip line connects two spaces that are within line of sight and obviously do not have anything blocking them. And one part of the zip line must be adjacent to you. When both ends attach, such as onto a wall or floor, you can then spend an action to hop onto the zip line to get to the other side. And you can actually hop off the line at any point during the zip line, which is kind of cool. Though for the Atlas, if you're investing in agility, this might not be necessary because you could probably already move 8 spaces, like by the time you pick up the actual frame itself. So this has some interesting things. Now, only size 1/2 characters can benefit from this particular zip line. And whenever a size 1 character or enemy crosses the space occupied by the line, they must make an agility save or fall prone. Any character adjacent to the start or end point of the line can tear the line down with a successful hull check, or as a quick action, or by successfully performing a melee attack against either end. The line has 1 HP and 10 evasion, so it's pretty easy to hit. Destroying the zipline in this way does not destroy the system, and otherwise, the line lasts until you use this system again. So this is a interesting one. It's only really good if you have other size 1/2 mechs on your team. The 8 spaces, I mean, this also can go up, like, vertically. So that being the case, there are some situations where this one can be used. The problem is, the major problem I have with this one is, as a quick action, you set the zip line, and then you need to spend another quick action to hop on and then off of the zip line. The only way I can see this being actually useful for a frame like the Atlas, which this is meant to be for, is if you're going vertically and you don't want to climb. Or you climbing would be more difficult. But there are better ways to get climbing to make it easier, so I don't know. Now, this is also insanely good, though, if you have allies who are not using this. Like, if you have a goblin on your team, for instance, or even like a Caliban, this can get your allies all right into the right place. And I can definitely see some scenarios where you're sneaking into an enemy base with a bunch of 1/2 size mechs. This can be a way to do so easily and get everyone there with you. So, overall, I don't think this one's bad, and it's only a singular system point, which makes it a really good pickup. But there's a lot of combat situations where this one might not come up. So I say this is a system that's great where you need it for like infiltration purposes or to help your teammates. But if you're using the Atlas, I really don't see using this all that often. All right, at rank 2, along with the Atlas frame, we have the Jager Kunst 1. This is a 2-point system, and it's a protocol that's actually pretty cool. So for the rest of the scene, anytime you move adjacent to an object or a freestanding piece of terrain that's larger than you, you move 2 spaces in any direction as a free action, ignoring engagement and reactions, running, tumbling, or sliding around. You can do this multiple times a turn, but only once for each unique object or piece of terrain. Now, this does, whenever you use this and you gain the benefits from it, or at least when you activate it at the beginning of the round, you do take a heat, and you do not have a lot of heat to work with. So this is very powerful. Jägerkunst is legitimately insane on so many frames. This is honestly so much better on more frames than it is for the Atlas itself. The Atlas really doesn't have a lot of heat to play around with. So doing this, granted for insane amounts of speed, can be really good. But you're playing with your life, and if the enemy has any way to give you heat, you should just not use this. But there's no size requirements for this one. So literally any frame can really pick this one up, and it would be really good. I can see a Blackbeard being a complete menace with this. Now, I do have to say, though, that at least for a lot of things, they do need to be 2 sizes larger than you, or not 2 sizes. They have to be larger than you, but there are many buildings in the urban settings that are bigger than all the frames. So this can be used quite easily by a lot of frames that have probably a lot more heat capacity. But if you are building a little bit of systems, or you at least have some way to mitigate some of your heat gain, the Jaeger can turn your Atlas into the Flash and you become insanely fast. So I really like this particular system. I think this is really good. And not only that, but this is a really good pickup for other frames as well. And again, if you're going with like the White Witch, which has a bit of better of heat management, this is insanely good to work with that frame's particular speed as well. So I think this is overall an insanely good system. Next up, we have Ricochet Blades. Now, this is a 3-point system, which I do think is a little expensive, but it does give you essentially extra weapons, so I guess it's fair. Now, as a quick action, you can throw a ricocheting blade. It is on a 3-line path, and it deals 2 kinetic damage to all characters it goes through. And after the initial line reaches a piece of terrain or object, you can create another 3-path line to hit even more people. Characters within the affected area must succeed an agility save or take a d6 plus 3 kinetic damage. So not only does this just automatically deal 2 kinetic damage to all characters within the affected area, but they then need to make an agility save or take even more damage as a d6 plus 3, which is insanely powerful. Not only that, but this does come as a limited system. It has 3 uses, which is pretty solid. The d6 plus 3 kinetic damage with an agility save is really good. Now, it does not say specifically they take half damage on a success. So it's either a d6 plus 3 or nothing. But still, I mean, they will always take at least the 2 kinetic damage. And there's not a ton of enemy frames out there that use a ton of agility. There definitely are some, but not a lot. So that being the case, this is a really good way to deal a lot of extra damage. And given some circumstances, you can essentially get a 6th line that can go even around corners, which is pretty cool. So I do really like this one. It is very expensive, but you essentially get another weapon that you can utilize. And there's a lot of frames I feel like could make good use of this one other than just the Atlas. I mean, the Atlas, this is really good for because positioning is easy. So getting yourself set up where you can bounce your ricochet blade is easier for you than most, but there's a lot of frames that could use this one as well. So honestly, here at the second rank of the license, we have a lot of good picks. If you're looking at the Atlas at all for your build, you're in good hands, at least at 2 ranks in. It's so good. I love both of these systems so much, and they're just solid, and they work on a lot of different frame types. So yeah. All right, at the 3rd rank, we have the Terashima Blade. Now, this is the main melee weapon for the Atlas, and it sucks that we can't use this until 3 ranks in. It's really good, don't get me wrong. It's really good. It's definitely worth a 3-rank investment in Atlas, but it feels like the Atlas wanted this so much sooner. And if Atlas is your first frame, you're going to have to deal with GMS melee weapons until this one comes up. Granted, there are some really good GMS melee weapons. Still, missing out on Terashima till rank 3 is very sad. But anyway, so this blade is a main melee weapon, and it has 4 stances plus its 0 stance or its no stance. And even at this stance, it is just a D6. Now, this is a 2-system blade, so you have to be careful when you're using your Atlas because you don't have a lot of system points to play with, but obviously you're going to want the Terashima blade, as I can't think of a better weapon. Obviously, it's made for the Atlas, but it's also just a really good weapon. So, what's it do? As a protocol, you can change stance, and whenever you start a combat, you can be in whatever stance you want to be in at the beginning of the combat. So you don't have to worry about what stance you are, really. The only thing you have to worry about is if you want to change stance in the middle of like a turn, because you really can't do that. Though you can always drop your stance for whatever reason as a free action. There is a special mention that you remain in whatever stance you choose until either you take a new stance, the weapon is destroyed, or you become stunned or jammed. The stunned or jammed part, I think a lot of people are going to mess up on, because they're going to get out of it and they're going to forget that they lost their stance. So you do have to remember, if you ever become stunned or jammed, you go back to the no stance, I guess. That being the case, though, let's look at what the stances do. First, we have Troll Stance, the high damage stance that we have here. Now, this one is inaccurate, but it's also armor piercing, and it does a d6 plus 3. Really good. Not a lot to complain about on this one. You're trading away some of your accuracy instead. Not only are you doing more damage, but you're also armor piercing, which is actually going to make the Terashima blade do just more damage than it would have normally. So Troll Stance is not just plus 3 damage. More often than not, you're at least getting 1 extra damage out of it, which makes the stance insanely good. So if you're going up against a tougher enemy, the higher the armor, the more this is actually beneficial to you, because the more you're actually piercing through. So Troll Stance is for taking down the big boys. Next up, we have the Storm Stance. Now, this one doesn't have any extra damage, but you do gain the Storm reaction. Scroll down here. So, after hitting with this weapon, you immediately deal 2 kinetic damage to all characters adjacent to you and your target. Now, it's not your target as well. So this isn't for dealing extra damage to your target, but instead, if you're fighting a bunch of enemies who are adjacent to each other, you can hit one of them and deal a little bit of extra kinetic damage to the rest of them. Really good for a bunch of enemies that are particularly clumped up. Next up is the Lord's Stance, and this one has a unique equipment effect. You cannot make any ranged or tech attacks, but any ranged attacks against you that miss deflect off your sword, dealing 2 damage of the same type as the attack to a character of your choice in range 3 and line of sight of you. Any melee attack that misses you forces the attacker to make a hull save or be knocked prone. This is the dueling stance. This is your one-on-one with an enemy. You're protecting yourself from range fire, and not only that, but you can redirect that range fire to the target of your duel, essentially. And if they miss you with a melee weapon, you can knock them prone, which means that you're likely to do some extra damage. So that being said, this is an insanely good dueling stance and very solid if you're not using the Troll Stance to cut through their armor. Lord Stance is one of those stances that I feel like is really good in a lot of situations, but given the amount of armor your enemy may have, being in Troll Stance will probably be better than not, though this one is more active when it's not your turn. So a good defensive stance to have over Troll Stance if you feel like you're going to receive a lot of fire from enemies attacking you from range and you just want to try directing that at your enemy, though they might have more armor than you can like penetrate with the 2. So yeah, I don't know. This one is, I would struggle to choose Lord Stance over Troll Stance, because Troll Stance I feel like is more helpful. It does just generally more damage, though the Lord Stance being able to knock your enemy prone is really good. And if you're just holding an enemy off more than trying to kill them, then maybe the Lord Stance is the one for you. The best part is you can just choose on the start of your next round after Lord Stance, you can just go to Troll Stance. And if the enemy got knocked prone, then they're in a lot of trouble. So either way, I do appreciate it that it's here, but I would probably end up being in Troll Stance more than this one. And the final stance we have here is the Wind Stance. Now, after attacking with this weapon, whether you hit or miss, you move 2 spaces in any direction, ignoring engagement and reactions. This one is also reliable to and has 2 knockback. It's very easy to miss the reliable 2 and knockback 2, but this is a particularly good stance when you're going into a battlefield that is fresh. Like, the Troll Stance is good for taking down enemies, but it lacks defenses. The Lord Stance is really good for dueling, but it lacks really many offensive capabilities. The Wind Stance, though, is really good when you're entering a battlefield for the first time, because anytime you attack with your weapon, you move 2 spaces, and you can hit an enemy, and even if you miss, you're likely to do some damage. And if you hit, they can be knocked back, and there's some really good knockback builds in the game, especially with some of the talents. So that being the case, I feel like Wind Stance is honestly the biggest sleeper in the bunch, Troll Stance is very tempting because of the armor piercing and damage. Even if it's inaccurate, there's ways to get around melee inaccuracies. But Wind Stance, I feel like, is very, very, reliable, reliable too. And this one is just really good for a lot of situations. What I really like about the Terashima blade in general is there's a stance for every situation. For 2 system points, and for kind of a weapon that doesn't do the most as far as main melees are concerned, the Terashima blade is insanely good. All right, and we're down to the final system here in the Atlas license. Let's look over it. So I traditionally, I've never liked the final system. Typically, they're not super great, but maybe this one will be different. Who knows? I'll let you be the judge. Anyway, the final system is Jager Kunst 2, an upgrade of the second one, or the first one we get at rank 2. This one is a 3-pointer, which is very expensive and honestly is going to not be in competition with the Terashima blade, but you're going to have to make some choices with some of the other systems here in the license. And it's a reaction. So you get this reaction, you can only do it it's limited 3, so unless you invest in your engineering, you'll only be able to do it 3 times. The trigger is you take damage from or deal damage with a melee attack. So it has to be a melee attack either way. So after the damage is resolved, you and your target are locked in this blade, this fatal clash, locking your melee weapons, as it were. And it's a contested hull or agility save. Each gets to pick. So they could pick hull while you could pick agility. You'll probably be using agility if you're using this particular mech. But, if you're picking this outside of using the Atlas, then you at least get to choose. And most mechs, or most pilots, do have hull. So hull is always not a bad one to have. But the loser is then knocked prone and takes a d6 kinetic damage. They're also knocked back 3 spaces in a direction chosen by the winner. The winner then may move 3 spaces in any direction, ignoring engagement and not provoking reactions. The loser may immediately take 2 AP kinetic damage to force the contest to be rolled, and this can be done over and over. And by the way, this damage can't be reduced in any way, so nothing in the game can prevent you from taking this 2 damage to re-roll the check. Now, if the result is a tie, the contest immediately ends. Otherwise, you both can keep choosing to take 2 AP damage to re-roll the contest until one of you takes a structure, in which case you automatically lose. So, yeah, Fatal Clash. What can I say? I don't know why this is on the Atlas specifically, because this particular system very much favors mechs who have more structure to pay. They have more hull points to pay to keep re-rolling and keep gambling against the enemy. So, your agility could be really, really high, but, the enemy likely has a decent hull at least. So there's always this chance that you could lose, and then you have to pay hull points or structure out, or you get knocked prone, you take potentially more damage and are knocked 3 spaces away. I don't know why the Atlas would ever do this. The Atlas wants to be in the square of the enemy that they're fighting, and they have a very aggressive fighting style. This does have some disengagement if you win the engagement, but the Fatal Clash is really good if you're a big mech. If you are a big mech with a lot of HP and probably a good amount of hull, there's no reason not to take this one if it's available to you, because, man, it's just extra damage. It's just a reaction once per round you can use to essentially guarantee that you're going to do at least a d6 more damage, and potentially more if they keep gambling to try to beat you. And if you have a lot of HP, you can keep doing that gamble, and if you have more HP than the enemy, then you're likely to win, unless they're, for some reason, rolling way hotter than you are. So not only is this one a gamble, but it does not a lot of damage. Like a d6 extra damage is fair, and knocking the enemy prone is good, but that's about it. That's the biggest benefit, other than, potentially spacing yourself out from the enemy, or I guess disengaging with some other mechs that might be adjacent to you at this time. But if you're the Atlas, you're likely gambling with your life. Now, granted, I will state many of the enemies in the game don't have structure. So once they go down to 0 hull points, they're done. So at the very least, you have structure to kind of gamble with in a sense, even though this will break as soon as you structure out. There's some stuff you could do. I don't know. The Ingerkunst Mark II, is not my favorite, at least for the Atlas. I would say for like the Blackbeard, this is insane. Honestly, there's a lot of mix between the Atlas and the Blackbeard that I can see the two really getting along super well. So if you're Blackbeard, Fatal Clash might actually be genuinely kind of good for you. And I'm sure there's some other tankier mechs that can really make use of this as well. But for the Atlas, it's anime, I guess. It's kind of cool. There's no size requirement for it. So being in one size 1/2 isn't going to be a detriment. But the biggest detriment is you're just going to have less hull than the enemy, more likely than not. So you can't gamble as often. And the likelihood that your agility is so much higher than the enemy to give you a guaranteed win is just not very likely. So that being the case, not really great on the Atlas, but I will say this is actually a good system. I do like this system. I think there's a lot of mechs that can really make use of this one, and it's definitely very interesting, and especially if you're playing like a defender, because this is also if you take melee damage as well. So you can take an enemy's attack and turn it against them into this kind of 1v1 clash where you can force them to spend hull points potentially, or just knock them flat on their ass. So I do like this one a lot. I just don't see why it is on the Atlas license specifically. But yeah, that's going to be it for the Atlas. We're getting to the end of the lists here. We only have White Witch and Emperor left. And next, we're going to cover the Kobold, which, hey, if you're a Lich fan, we're almost there. And I think we only have one more that's not even on screen here. We have the Sun Z is the last frame of Harrison Army, which we're going to get to. So we're getting very close to the end, but that will not be the end of the Lancer videos here on this channel. Definitely there will be more to come, so don't worry. But for now, that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.